So, good morning, students. Today we will be discussing on objectivity in ethics. I think I, I mean, whether objectivity is possible in ethics or not, right? So, ethics is related with science, or ethics is a kind of value perception, right? That's the question before us. Even if ethics is not scientific, it's a kind of perception, it's a kind of human psychology, hence it's a kind of illusion. Should we be ethical or not? In philosophy, like other concepts, these concepts this concept is unresolved yet, right? We have already taken two classes on ethics. If a question I will ask you, what is ethics? What will be your response? And accordingly, I will move from your answer. Now, you please unmute your audio and video and let me know what do you understand by ethics?
Sir, ethics means the capacity to decide what is right and what is wrong.
Ethics is all about deciding what is right and wrong. Okay, thank you, Karan. Pradeep? Pradeep, are you there?
Yes, sir. So ethics is about the morality, what should be,
Ethics is
how
all about,
humans should guide their life.
yes.
Ethics is essential to guide us and to lead us a civilized human life.
So ethics is something related to it normativity, and ethics is uh, related with it's related with normativity, what you were saying. So yes, it is not, I mean, both the answers are not wrong from philosophy point of view, but these answers are not sufficient to the understanding of ethics or to the understanding of objectivity or objectiveness. So basically, what is right, we do not know, and we cannot justify that this is right and that is wrong. It's very difficult until and unless you are not influenced by your perception. But certainly, what is wrong in different contexts, we understand it. And to be ethical means not to commit those mistakes what will hinder to you, your individuality, and hinder to the society. So to be ethical means to be within the constraints, and these constraints are moral constraints. Now what is a moral constraints? It's a thought, or it's a limitation what you impose on you. It's a limitation what you impose on you on the basis of your morality, on the basis of your abstract thinking about the future. So morality, it's a abstract thinking about the future, right? And different individuals, they have their own levels of morality. So ethics consists in judgment about the moral constraints. A person is ethical only when he or she is having a judgment based on his or her moral constraints. This is ethics. And what is objective? Can anybody answer? I mean, whether Karan and Pradeep, only two students are there in this course. What is objective? What do you mean by that? Karan?
Sir, objective means certain principle which are achieved, which people are aspired to achieve.
Okay. Pradeep?
I think objectivity is related with scientificity.
Yeah. Can you further explain it?
An objective truth is something that is completely empirical.
Okay. Thank you. So, objectivity, again, your answers are not wrong answers. Let me give my answer. What is objective or objectivity? Now, objective is what is so independently or what is so independent of one's particular attitude or position. That is objective. What Karan said, it is all about guided by certain principles. It's not the person and his position. Rather, it is all about certain kind of rationality, certain kind of logic, certain kind of based on certain kind of principles, rules, regulation. That is objective, right? Now you think ethics is a judgment. Ethics is a judgment based on your moral constraints. Hence, ethics or to be ethical means it is something psychological. It is something psychological. Can I make you ethical? Nobody on the earth can make others to be ethical if he or she is not having that psychology or attitude. Now, if it is all about psychological, then can this psychology be studied scientifically, objectively, or what do you mean by objective? The idea objective, is it a monolithic concept or it has multiple meanings in different contexts? Certainly, in a postmodern society, we always give importance to the context, and hence the simple answer would be objective is not a monolithic concept, it has different meaning in different contexts. So, let us understand what are the different meanings of objective. In one sense, a particular ethical judgment is objective if and only if it is correct. It is correct means it is the truth. Just delete the word correct. Let me say once again. A particular ethical judgment is objective if and only if it is truth or related to the truth. And this is called objectivity as truth. Now, according to this perspective, suppose there are two persons. One person is saying the truth and other person is lying. And when other person is lying, he is putting his lie very much logically, rationally, scientifically, with causality. Then you will support to whom? The person who is speaking truth and the person who is logically, rationally, and scientifically lying. Now, to some philosophers and those who are the believer of the school of thought, objective as truth, now for them, objectivity means truth or related with the truth. So, in one sense, objectivity means it's truth, objectivity as truth. In other sense, some ethical judgments are correct, but which is neither true or false. Some ethical judgments are correct, but it is neither true or false. Let me give the example of marriage. Marriage is required. Marriage is a social institution, it is required for the samsara. I mean, it's a primary unity. But if I'll put this question, is marriage a truth or it is a false? It is a maya. Then you may say that it is both. It is truth and it is also false, maya. But certainly, marriage is required. Marriage is correct because it has its own relevance. It is required for the sustenance of society of individual. Now, here you see that there are certain ethical judgment or ethical decision that is neither truth nor false, but certainly it is correct. It is correct in its own context. And this is called objectivity as correctness. What is correct, what is contextually right, it may not be absolute right, and nor it is false. It's contextual right. But certainly it is correct. Your answer is correct, but your answer is neither truth or false. So here others understand objective or objectivity as correctness. In the third sense, a particular ethical judgment is objective if it results from judge's responsible assessment of relevant ethical consideration, not unduly influenced by his or her desires or emotion, etc. This is called objectivity as justification. So first is the objectivity of truth, objectivity as truth, objectivity as correctness, and third is the objectivity as justification. Now, what is objective? Now, if I am not influenced by my desire and emotion, and I arrive to a judgment after assessing all the ethical consideration, then it is objective, or then I am objective. Because here, to be objective or to become objective means having enough justification. The first, to become objective means whether you are at the end of truth or not. Second, you are objective or not, that depends whether you are correct or whether you are with situational correctness or not. Third, you are objective only when you have sufficient justification, that is free from the biasness as well. Now, in the fourth sense, something has objective value if it gives everyone a reason to respond, to it in the same way, regardless of his or her relation to it. This is called objectivity as impartiality. I'm repeating. Something has objective value if it gives everyone the reason to respond to it in the same way, regardless of his or her relation to it. So to be objective means not to be partial. To be objective means to be impartial. So here we find four different sense of objectivity. Objectivity as truth, objectivity as correctness, objectivity as justification, and objectivity as impersonality. Now let's come to the ethical reality, or is ethics real? Can we be objective, or can we objectively understand ethics? Is there any ethical reality that everybody will share, and the principles of this objectivity will be applicable to ethics? And what are the principles of objectivity? Objectivity as truth, objectivity as correctness, objectivity as justification, and objectivity as impersonality. Can
That's
ethics
impartiality.
have, yes,
That's impartiality.
impersonality or impartiality? I do understand. Okay, let me take a call right now. A call is coming, so I'll come back after 1 or 2 minutes. I'm sorry. Impartiality or impersonality. I think this is same. So the question before us is that the characters what objectivity says, is it applicable to the ethics or not? Is there any ethical reality? Is ethics related to the truth? Is ethics related to the situational correctness? Is ethics related, or does ethics depend on justification? Or is ethics all about impartiality? So we will examine it in this class. So is there any ethical reality? Where that reality is, what ethical judgments would be answerable to, and are there ethical entities existing out there in the world? So these are the central questions around which philosophers still now they are struggling to get a answer. Now, what makes a judgment distinctively ethical is not that they are about entities of distinctive kind. In other words, we may ask this question: do things actually have a ethical properties? Do things have a ethical property? I mean, what you think that it should be, does it mean that the God has created that kind or property in that way where the people should think like this about that object or about that kind or property, or it is all about the subjectivities of the individuals? So this is something a philosophical question before us. What makes a judgment distinctively ethical? How to know this is a ethical judgment? It is a ethical decision. Is ethical universal? Now, what is ethical to you? Is it ethical to others? So, in other words, we may ask this question: do things actually have ethical properties? So, let's ask this question like this: can it be so that something is good or bad, right or wrong? Can we say that something is right and something is wrong? Pradeep, where is Karan? Pradeep, ethics, to be objective in this sense, it is not enough that ethical judgments is either true or false. So ethics or ethical judgment is neither true or false to J.L. Mackie. All ethical judgments are false because they all contain a mistaken presupposition that something is having an ethical property. Now, what J.L. Mackie He's saying that before you having an ethical judgment, you presuppose that everything in every situation there is a ethical property attached to it. That's the presupposition you do have before you make a ethical judgment. And that's why J.L. Mackie is saying that ethical judgments are false. There is nothing called ethical property or ethical property, there is nothing called ethical property attached to any object or any event. Now, those who deny that ethical judgment are beliefs may still affirm that they can be correct in some way, if not true. Now, to J.L. Mackie, he is saying that ethical judgment is based on a belief, based on a presupposition. Presupposition is a belief, and hence ethical judgment is a belief because it is based on a belief, based on a presupposition. But there are some, they deny that ethical judgments are belief. For them, ethical judgments are not belief, rather than they are situationally correct, if not truth. So those who are opposing to J.L. Mackie, Mackie, for them ethics is not all about belief. Rather, ethics is all about either truth or situationally correct, because they are the follower of the first two schools of thought, that is objectivity as truth and objectivity as correctness. There are right and wrong answers to ethical questions. If I'll ask you, should we kill or should individual kill individuals, then some will say that yes, it is absolutely right to kill by an individual to an individual, and some will say that no, it should not. So either you will justify or you will falsify it. And to be ethical means not to be inhuman. Hence, there is right answer or wrong answer to the ethical questions. Even if there is no ethical reality that makes them right and wrong. So even if there is no ethical reality, even if there is, even if ethical judgment based on presupposition means ethical, there is nothing called ethical reality. And when there is nothing called ethical reality, then the question of right and wrong doesn't appear. So even if there is no such ethical reality, even if it is based on certain kind of presupposition, even if right and wrong metaphor is not appropriate, still then there are right and wrong answers to the ethical questions. And ethical questions are basically the normative questions. The correctness of ethics depends on justification, right? So in the, or you see the first school of thought, how it has been critically dealt by J.L. Mackie and others. So it may not be Ethical judgments may not be correct or truthful. It may not be, there may not be any ethical reality because it is based on presupposition. I'm repeating this thing. Since ethical reality is not there, question of right and wrong will not arise, but still then there are certain ethical questions. There are certain ethical questions, and answers to those ethical questions can be right and wrong. Then the third, let's come to the third school of thought and let's examine it. Now, the correctness of ethics depends on justification, right? So, the third and fourth sense or school of thought that is related with each other. The first and second sense is related, and the third and fourth sense of objectivity is related. The third and fourth is that objectivity as correctness, sorry, objectivity as justification. Sorry. I'm mistaken. I think all these four senses, they are interconnected with each other. So in the beginning, either objectivity is truth. If not, objectivity is situationally correct. What is situationally correct? That is objective. And if ethics or ethical reality is not there, if the question of right and wrong is inappropriate, then one cannot dismiss the ethical questions and one cannot dismiss the answer to those ethical questions either as right or wrong. So what it means, ethics means something what is situational. Something what is situational. It is not absolute, it is not universal. It is all about the situational correctness. Now the correctness of ethics depends on justification. Now how to know whether certain judgments are situationally correct or not? Now it depends on justification. Ethical belief may not be justified always, yet it does not mean that no ethical beliefs are true. Now there is always a contestation. To some, how to know whether your ethical judgment is situationally correct or not? Now the answer is whether there is proper justification or not. Now the justification will validate ethics, or it will validate whether it is situationally correct or not. But again, this view has been critiqued by others. And what is their criticism? Now, ethical belief may not be justified always. So they are not denying that ethics should not be justified. They are saying that yes, ethics can be justified. But ethics is not limited to justification. Ethical belief may not be justified always, yet it doesn't mean that no ethical beliefs are true. So ethical belief can be correct or can be true without the justification. Ethical judgment or belief, judgment is a belief actually. Ethical judgment or belief, it may depend on justification, it may not also. Even if one's ethical belief might be true, one has no reason to treat them as true. That means even if my judgment, my ethical judgment is truth, correct, but still then I cannot justify it because I have no reason to justify it as true and others as false, because I have limitations. In another sense, ethics is objective if it does not depend on one psychology, and that is something known as objectivity as mind independence, what we call impersonality or impartiality. So, what is objective? Objective means if you are not guided by your own psychology. But is it possible to say that ethical judgments does not depend on one psychology when all judgments are psychological phenomena? Can we say that the ethical judgment is a distinct kind of judgment that is not related with the psychology, when we know that all judgments are psychological phenomena? Now, can it be to assert that things about which one makes ethical judgments depends on one psychology? So where to go? Can we say that ethics is dependent, or ethics is independent of psychology, human psychology, or ethics is dependent on human psychology? Pradeep, what is your position on this issue? Pradeep? No, I can't hear you, Pradeep. Pradeep, are you there? Let me check. Your audio is not working. So, what is the right thing? What is a fair point, fair starting point? Whether to accept that ethics is all about independence from human psychology, or ethics is all about human psychology. I think it is difficult to say that ethical judgment or ethical belief are not related with the human psychology. I think the more promising interpretation is that ethic depends on one psychology. What you think it is ethical, it may not be thought as same by others. So your ethics is not free from your own psychology. Though theoretically we understand ethics means free from the biasness, but can you be free from it? Hence, a fair starting point or the promising interpretation will be that ethics depends on psychology, at least some property of human psychology. At least, if not all. Human psychology may have vested interest, may have the concept of vested interest, and human psychology may have the concept of common good. But the concept of common good that is within your mind, that is not universal, that is something related to your psychology, what you think, that's how it has become like this before you. The mind dependency of ethical property entails mind dependence of ethical correctness. The mind dependence of ethical properties entails mind dependence of ethical correctness. Now, if ethical judgment, I'll come to that. Right now, I'm not understanding. If ethical judgments predicates psychological property, then what make those judgments true or false are psychological facts. Okay, you forget the above statement. I think this is important. Now, if it is ethical judgment, if it is related with your own psychology, it is very much particular to you. It is not universal. If it is all about this, then what makes this judgment true or false are psychological fact. So what you say it is right, it should, and what you say no, it should not, it is wrong, it is not correct. Now this is not scientific. This is also psychological because it is based on what J.L. Mackey say. It is based on some kind of presupposition that everything has a ethical property. One may not buy this logic that ethical judgment predicate properties, but he may hold that ethical judgment is correct and their correctness is mind independent. Now, it will also be unfair to say that or ethical judgment is your subjective feelings. It is also wrong to say that because there are so many subjective feelings. There is also subjective feelings of Plato and Aristotle. There is also subjective feelings of you and me. Are they same? But can I say that the ethical judgment of Plato and Aristotle, that is truth, that is correct, that is justified, and in my case it is not? No, you cannot. Whether it is Plato or Aristotle or whether it is you, we are caught by this limitation. We are caught by our subjectivities. So one may not buy this logic that ethical judgment is all about human subjectivities, it is all about the psychological facts. Or in other words, they are dismissing the ethical properties or ethical judgment. Now one may not accept, one may not buy that dismissal. Rather, one may say that ethical judgments may be truth, may be false, based on higher kind of deliberation inside you, but it is mind limited, it is mind dependent. So no doubt the ethical judgment of Plato and Aristotle, that is something higher, that may be something very close to the truth, situationally correct. But despite all these, Plato and Aristotle cannot claim that their ethical judgment is value neutral. Their ethical judgment is not mind dependent. So they are almost all ethical judgments of different from Plato to you, ordinary person. These are all mind dependent. But there is difference between you and those. Now, Kantian theory might claim that ethical judgment do not predicate special ethical properties of action, but instead a command, and these command can be correct, and what makes them correct is something about human will. This is Immanuel Kant. For him, ethical judgments ethical judgments is not having the special ethical properties attached to it. And for Immanuel Kant, ethical judgments are actually the commands, and it is the commands of the sovereign. It is the command of the sovereign. And what the sovereign say, that is correct and hence ethical. And what makes them correct is something about the human will. And that is the legitimacy of that moral judgment or correctness. I'm just having some water. So I hope you understand this Kantian theory. Now, according to Christian Korsgaard, Korsgaard. Now, what makes, I will share you the material where you can find about these authors in the reference section. Now, what makes an ethical judgment correct is that judgment is constitutive of rational and reflective agency. So, no doubt, the ethical judgment of Plato and ethical judgment of an ordinary person like me, both are mind dependent. But there is difference. My ethical judgment is not that much rational and reflective than Plato and Aristotle. So, what makes an ethical judgment correct is that judgment is constitutive of rational and reflective agency. Thus, the correctness of ethical judgment depends on the necessary structure of mind that is capable of asking ethical questions. And Plato and Aristotle, they had a different structure of mind, and that mind was able to ask some ethical questions, and accordingly they were developing their ethical judgment through their rational and reflective orientation. But the ethical judgment what an ordinary person have, do they have that kind of mind, that kind of orientation? Do they ask that kind of ethical questions to themselves? No. That is the difference between the ordinary person and extraordinary person like Plato and Aristotle. But the commonality is that their ethical judgment and your ethical judgment, that is mind dependent. Now, to some, ethics could be correct if and only if God laid down ethical laws. There are laws only where there are laws only where there is a lawgiver. Motor lawgivers can establish only conventional laws. Therefore, God can establish ethical laws. And those who are against the objectivity of ethics or who are critical about the objectivity of ethics, they give a very interesting argument. To them, ethical judgment is possible only when there is a ethical laws prescribed by the God himself. And if the laws are given by mortal human beings like us, Plato and Aristotle are also mortal human beings, then these are not the ethical laws, rather than these are the conventional laws. And conventional laws cannot be the base of ethical judgments. Conventional laws may produce subjective judgments, not ethical judgments. To have ethical judgments, you must have ethical laws prescribed by the God. This is a very interesting argument, the critique of ethical objectivity they produce. Now, other argues that ethical judgment can be correct because they wish to justify the tolerance of different ethical judgments. That is another interesting argument of critics of ethical objectivity. To them, okay, let's accept that ethical judgments are correct. And why ethical judgments are correct? Because there is a tolerance of different ethical judgments. Suppose you have an ethical judgment, I have an ethical judgment, and Karan has an ethical judgment. If I say that my ethical judgment is right and yours are wrong, then you may not agree with me. You may say that this is not your ethical judgment, this is your subjective judgment. But when you will say that, or when you will accept my ethical judgment, only when I accept your ethical judgment. So this is the tolerance of different ethical judgment that justifies the acceptability of ethical judgment, and that may legitimize the situational correctness of ethical judgment. If no ethical judgment is correct, then one cannot ground one's intolerance of differing judgments on the claim that one's own judgment is right. Suppose all these ethical judgments are wrong or partially right. So can I claim that mine is right and yours is wrong? No, it will be wrong, or it will be incorrect. Now, I'm repeating, if no ethical judgment is correct, then one cannot ground one's intolerance. So, if no ethical judgment is correct, can I say that yours is wrong? No, I cannot. If you are wrong and I am wrong, then it makes no sense if I say that you are wrong. Then one cannot ground one's intolerance of differing judgment on the claim that one's own judgment is right. Now, this shows only that there is false premise of in one argument for intolerance. Now, if I say that it is whatever I am saying it is right, and whatever you are saying that is wrong, then it is all about a false consciousness. If I am right, then I am partially right. If you are wrong, then you are partially wrong. So partial right means partially wrong. From that sense, there is we can accept the ethical judgment, and we can differentiate ethical judgment from subjective judgments. Now, a more prevalent concern among contemporary political philosophers is that the objectivity of ethical development is incompatible with the apparent link between making an ethical judgment and being motivated to act accordingly. Now they are the contemporary political philosopher. Now they are problematizing the ethical objectivity of or ethical objectivity. And how they are problematizing? Now they are saying that there is a link, and that link is apparent. You can see it. So there is an apparent link between the ethical judgment and being motivated to and act accordingly. I mean, on which or what impress you or what impresses you, you generally fall in love with that, your likingness towards that, that guides you to justify that through your morality or ethics. So there is a link between between your ethical judgment and your subjective choice. Generally, your ethical position on a issue, generally it is also based on your choice. So your ethical judgment and your choice, generally it matches and it coincides. Now Michael Smith and Prosgard argued in their work that making an ethical judgment entails being motivated to act accordingly. Now Michael Smith and Prosgard, they hold a position. What they are saying in their work, they have justified in that material. You can refer the references, refer these authors in the reference section. I'm repeating. Now, in their work, they found that ethical judgments are actually derived from your motivation to an act. So there is a strong relation between your ethical judgment and your choice. What you choose, that you establish as a kind of ethics. Now, other philosophers are impressed by the disagreement in ethics. I mean, to have a ethical judgment or ethical personality, ethical belief, I think the fair starting point to those philosophers are actually the disagreement in ethics. The more you disagree, the better will be your ethical judgment. Now, ethical disagreement does not entail that ethical judgments cannot be correct. I'm repeating. Ethical disagreement does not entail that ethical judgments are not, cannot be correct. I mean, ethical agreement. One is ethical agreement, other is ethical disagreement. One should not disagree for the sake of disagree. There can be an agreement on a particular ethical judgment, and there may be disagreement on different ethical judgments. So the correct and falsity does not depend on the agreement or disagreement on ethical judgments. In some cases, ethical agreement may produce a correct ethical judgment, and in some context, ethical disagreement produce the correct ethical judgment. Ethical disagreement is ethical disagreement is in some way different from other kinds of disagreement. Ethical disagreement is in some way different from other kinds of disagreement. That difference is evidence that ethical judgment are explained by something other than their subject matter. Ethics can be given an unmasking explanation and that it cannot resolve its own question. Now, that is difference between the ethical disagreement and the normal disagreement. In the ethical disagreement, I mean, you don't have a destination and you are not guided by that destination. You all are guided by your self introspection. You try to understand in the ethical disagreement. And in the normal disagreement, you have your subjective position, and until and unless that your position is not satisfied, you don't agree. But such is not the case with the ethical disagreement. The difference, ethical disagreement is in some way different from other kinds of disagreement. That difference is evidenced that ethical judgment are explained by something other than their subject matter. Different parties of ethical disagreement, they are not guided by their subjectivities, rather than they try to understand the others but somehow failing to understand it. So that makes a difference between the ordinary disagreement and the ethical disagreement. And in the ethical disagreement, there is unmasking explanation. Unmasking explanation. That means you need to unpack everything, whatever your vested interest is. You need to unmask yourself. But in ordinary disagreement, unmasking explanation is not there. It is not expected in the ordinary disagreement. Now, philosophers like Gilbert Herman, Bernard Williams, Crispin Wright doubted that ethics can be objective on the ground that it is subject or its subject matter does not provide causal explanation. So, to conclude, ethics as a whole is a kind of illusion, but this is an enlightened illusion. This is an enlightened illusion. So, ethics or ethical judgment, it can be truth, it may have or it may be situationally correct, it may have justification, it may have or it may constitute impartiality, but it is limited to human psychology, it is limited to your values. So that's why we cannot claim that ethics is or to be ethical means to be objective. And at the same time, we cannot dismiss ethics because ethics sometimes it is related with truth, sometimes it is related with the situational correctness, sometimes it is related with the justification, and sometimes it is related with the impartiality. But still then it is mind dependent. And when it is mind dependent, when it depends on human psychology, it cannot be objective. It is an illusion, but that illusion is far better than other kinds of illusion because it is a intelligent illusion. So I am ending here. So this is all about the critical analysis of ethical objectivity. So I am stopping the recording.